Meanwhile, down the hall, Marvel Comics, as many of you know, was part of Martin Goodman's publishing empire called Magazine Management. And they put out pulp magazines and men's adventure magazines, including one that Stan wrote fiction for under his most common fake name of Stan Lee while he was Stan Lee. But now I think he legally is Stan Lee. The legend has it that he was saving Stanley Martin Lieber for the novels and whatever else he would write, and it turned out that Stan Lee was the guy who did all the famous stuff. So that Stan was, I think, the logo of Mail magazine. He may be listed as an editor, and then "Where Is Thy Sting," which is a Shakespeare line that, although many of us think, most of us again think of it as a Stan Lee line, actually a Shakespeare line. Which was it, Jim? Shakespeare or Stan?
I think it's John Donne.
It's John Donne. Okay. And then in the among the people who worked for magazine management was Mario Puzo, who tried writing comics, but he found it too difficult. He found writing novels, and he wrote a lot of, I think, tales of adventures of World War II battles. He was a veteran, and he wrote tons and tons of stuff, especially for Bruce J. Friedman, who was the editor. It's Drew Friedman's father was an editor of magazine management. And I believe when Mario ran out of real World War II battles to write about, he made up Korean. I think he did both. I mean, yeah, Korean War II, but not Vietnam. I think Vietnam was sort of too depressing in general. That was not a good. Seriously, that what they talked about around the office. That's a big war to try to. So whether or not the battles happened, Mario wrote about them, and then several years before The Godfather, he wrote a children's book called The Runaway Summer of Davy Shaw, and to which he inscribed for Stan Lee. So this is like a special plastic folder in the archives. For Stan Lee, whose imagination I cannot hope to equal. And then here are some holiday cards that the bullpen made for Stan that were in the archives. So they're just drawn by, I'm not even sure by the different bullpen guys. If you look in the book, you'll see the signatures of legends of comics and people from the 40s, 50s, 60s bullpen. At the same time, around 1960, just before the Fantastic Four, Stan self-published as Madison Publishing a ribald reader for the Bon Vivant, known as Blushing Blurbs, and yes, that is Joan Lee on the cover, Stan's wife. But honey, you told me to take up a hobby. And apparently these self-publishing ventures went very well for Stan. We had one called Golfers Anonymous, and of course Secrets Behind the Comics. Here's Stan, Joan, and Joan Jr. and I think it was Stan on a horse. There used to be a horsey thing here. We had the Mario Puzo. Michael got the Godfather idea with that. And that building at University of the Bronx is one of the buildings Stan lived in as a kid. Also one of the buildings Len Wein lived in as a kid. When Marvel started getting popular, there was a whole world of comics fandom that had come into existence, spearheaded by a couple of guys. One of them was Dr. Jerry Bales, and in the book, actually from Roy's files, we have letters from him to Jerry Bales to Stan, in which Stan talks about this Spider-Man thing. I think it might catch on. And then here's an article by Roy, in which, for sure, definitively, we know who created the Fantastic Four. It spells everything out, so there's no doubt in anybody's mind anymore. But Roy wrote about it with, with data from Stan and his own research. This is an early interview in the Marvel Age from the Castle of Frankenstein magazine. It was before the media blitz of Stan Lee and Marvel, so it just says that inside an interview with Marvel Comics. They interviewed the entire institution. It was a pretty famous interview, a very insightful and frank one. Here, and I found this in the archives, is Roger Ebert, before he was Roger Ebert, when he was a guy hanging around movie theaters and used comic book stores, or used magazine stores, saw that something was happening with the comic books in the mid-60s. And the woman, and so he wrote an article for Midwest Magazine, the Chicago Sun-Times. That woman is named, what's her name? She was famous, Miss LaChapelle, who apparently was legendary in Chicago comic circles. And so she's the one holding Captain Marvel. Ebert wrote about Stan, Marvel, the new phenomenon. This is probably a year before he became the movie critic. In A Sign of the Times, one of the hardest things about this book was getting permission to reprint this article, because the Sun-Times, like many other newspapers, doesn't have anybody in staff who does that. They outsourced it. So finding out who it was to ask permission from and getting them to get back to you was harder than when they finally did get the permission. And Ebert gave his blessing too. There's so this came out around the time of the Batman TV show. Here's a guy named I found in that file a series of boxes labeled Radio and Television 1947 to 1980. I found an interview from 1968 with NPR's Neal Conan when he was 18 or 19 years old, interviewing Stan on WBAI in New York. Conan later interviewed Stan. When I called him to see if he wanted to write an introduction to the article, he said, "I don't have time for that. Can you hook me up with Stan for another interview?" So he interviewed Stan last year. It's on the NPR website. And there's Conan is also friends with Chris Claremont, so there he is in an issue of X-Men from the 80s at the bottom there. During the course of the interview, they talk about possibly the first story song by Stan Lee, headline hunter, foreign correspondent, in the strange riddle of the plague of death. So if this isn't the first story Stan wrote, the first comic story, it's one of the first.